Well, in 2010, I looked on in astonishment as Conservative MEPs voted for the City of London to fall under the regulation of, yes, you've guessed it, the European Union. It would appear, since Brexit, precious little has been done to free us from it. And overnight, Britain's biggest investor from Legal & General says the City of London is falling behind. Liam, Legal & General, absolutely massive company. What is Sir Nigel Wilson actually saying?
Sir Nigel Wilson, a real doyen of the British financial scene, massively experienced. He oversees the mighty Legal & General. £1.2 trillion, 1,200 billion pounds of savers' money in those pension funds, in those life and insurance schemes. And what he's basically saying isn't that the City of London's falling behind to Paris or Frankfurt, because that would be preposterous. But what he's saying is that the City of London is falling behind to the other global hubs, New York, Singapore, Hong Kong. And what he's saying in particular is if we go all the way back to Gordon Brown era legislation, so-called FRS 17, these accounting rules that require pension funds to account for their investments in a certain way. He's saying we have amazing entrepreneurial acumen in this country. He says entrepreneurialism, marketable ideas at British universities, particularly in science, is on fire, growing great guns, but we're not any good anymore at getting our own savers' money behind our own ideas and marketing them and turning invention into innovation into profit.
And much of that is to do with EU rules, which we all believed when we woke up on the 24th of... Well, I didn't go to bed, actually, but on the 24th of June...
to bed since
2016, we all believed this stuff would be removed. The barriers would be removed. Are we anywhere near this?
There have been some changes, as you know, but there hasn't been nearly the sort of big bang, great lifting of a sort of attitude of obstructionism and precautionary principle. The culture of EU regulation still pervades too much of the City of London. Now, Sir Nigel Wilson does not talk idly. He's not a sort of rent-a-quote kind of guy. No. This will be very, very considered intervention.
No,
and it's an important one. And it was rightly on the front of the Telegraph this morning.
Absolutely. Now, the story that's had almost no coverage today are last month's borrowing figures.
The borrowing figures came out at 7 a.m. this morning, and I've been reporting them on GB News all day. I am surprised they haven't got more attention, frankly. Let's have a look at some of these borrowing figures. So in April 2023, Nigel, the UK government borrowed £25.6 billion in one single month. That's more than almost double what we borrowed in April 2022. April last year, £13.7 billion. And we can see the numbers there.
Yeah.
What's even more troubling to me is that in the single month of April 2023, the UK government racked up in debt interest bill £9.8 billion. Now, we're not going to pay all that at once.
No.
An excellent economist, an ex-Treasury economist called Julian Jessup has been making the point rightly on Twitter today, very much a friend of GB News, that we don't pay that £9.8 billion all at once, but we will still end up paying it over a period of time. And £9.8 billion, Nigel, that is the equivalent of 2 extra p for a year on the basic rate of income tax. That's the equivalent to 20 hospitals, a single month's interest bill. It's absolutely huge.
When the Conservatives came to power in 2010, promising they'd deal with the debt and the deficit and all this stuff, we were roughly 650 billion in the red.
That's the total stock of national debt.
And that was after the banks had been bailed out.
That's right.
Since 2010, so what is our, from 650, where are we now?
Strap yourself in. About 2.5 trillion. So more than 3 times more in 13 years, the debt has gone up.
Now,
and something has happened, a structural change has happened. Before lockdown, I'm not saying before COVID, this is how we responded to COVID. Before lockdown, before we decided to lock down our economy, as so many other economies did, the UK government was spending roughly 39 to 40% of GDP every year.
Yeah.
That fateful year 2020, understandably, given that they went for lockdown, all those C-bill loan supporting companies, that massive furlough scheme, of course, paying so many of the workforce to basically stay at home, government spending went up from about 40% of GDP to 53% of GDP.
A socialist state.
The highest sort of peacetime figure on record ever. And instead of going after 53 in 2020, instead of going back down to 40, we went down to 44, 45. We're now at 46. It's going up again. So we seem to have gone through a structural break where we're now spending 5% more of GDP as the government spending rather than private spending than before COVID lockdown.
So, an economic question, but it's political. We have a Conservative Party that have put taxes up, and if this borrowing's maintained, those taxes really can't come down.
That's right.
We have the size of a state growing massively, debt exploding. Do we have to fear anything from Labour?
Well, even Labour now are saying it's not all about the money you spend. Keir Starmer gave a speech earlier this week that he wouldn't have dared to give 2 or 3 years ago, saying maybe we need to reform the NHS rather than just spending more money on it. We'll see how he gets on when the public sector unions attack him as and when he gets into power. But what's important is we now have sort of French levels of spending, but a British tax system that isn't sort of culturally and institutionally geared up to deliver French levels of taxation. I think the only way out of this is to grow the economy. But of course, when you've got a tax burden at a 70-year high and rising, when you're raising corporation tax from 19 to 25% at a stroke, when you're freezing tax thresholds, so a fifth of the workforce will now be paying the top rate of tax, at least by 2027, then is that going to encourage growth?
And we need growth, and we're back to where we started.
It's only growth that allows you to handle these massive level debts.
And we're back to where we started. Legal and General telling us great ideas in Britain not being turned into productive ideas. Liam, thank you as ever.